Hey everybody, this is Dr. Lisa, and you have joined me today on Happy Hour with Dr. Lisa. So I am your host. I will be here for the next 50 minutes with you discussing all of the lovely children that I have had the opportunity to meet, children that I call nebulous children. These are children that I've worked with who have the ability to see ghosts. Believe it or not, it is absolutely true. So sit back, relax, and join me. We are going to talk about my blog 6, from my website, which is lisaliganschambers.com. So if you haven't been keeping up, make sure you go to the blog and read it. It's pretty interesting. So on my blog, I'm talking about all of the different experiences that I've had working with these children. It's a long history. I'm getting older, and so I'm starting to see, where, I can help people in other ways. So one of the ways is to discuss all of these babies who I've met over the years that have the ability to see ghosts, and sometimes see or predict other things. So those are stories that I'm going to share in the future on my blog. So keep up. So you like that cliffhanger from last week? I left you guys hanging, but here's the deal. We are going to get into one of the favorite kids that I've ever worked with, which is Child A. So this is what all of you have been waiting for. You've been waiting for me to actually discuss these babies. So let's do it. Alrighty. So let me give you a little bit of background about Child A. So this was a little one that I met, as I said last week, at a university in St. Louis. So I was working at a mental health center at a university and moved to St. Louis to work for this university. So this was my second time actually living in the greater St. Louis area. And so when I worked at this university, it is a community mental health center. So remember what I said before, a community mental health center is located within the community that it serves. Now, this particular place served the region of St. Louis. And so a lot more people would come, to see us at the university, as opposed to it just being mostly individuals from the neighborhood. So anyway, we had a wait list. And so this little person was on the wait list, and I pulled this person off the top of the list. And this was a family of 3. So an only child. So you have not heard me talk about only children yet, but this was a child with no siblings. And so a lot of attention was focused on this little one. And this child must have been about 9. Very well-spoken little kid. So when I walked into the waiting room, I can tell that these parents were on edge. I can still see it in my mind to this day. They were on edge. And so I did my interviews for families was in the back of the waiting room. So it's a really nice area, nice waiting room, had lots of toys and everything in it. And then we would go around to the back into one of the conference rooms to do we go into one of the conference rooms to do the interviews. So when we were walking back, I was in front, then the mother, then the father, then the child. And this is an important point later on. So we go into the interview room. And when we're sitting there, I noticed that Child A was kind of like, if you could see me on Facebook or on Instagram, I'm kind of looking around in the air, because that's kind of what this kid was doing. Now, what you may not know about me, because I don't know if I revealed it or not, a lot of my background is in behaviorism. So by trade, I'm actually a behaviorist. With that in mind, I notice every little thing that kids do. And so with this one, I noticed how, this one was kind of looking around like this. Now, in my past, what I had learned is sometimes those can be symptoms of kids who can see ghosts, but I don't ask that question directly. I mean, my God, I don't meet people and go, hello, I'm Dr. Lisa. You're looking around. Do you see ghosts? That would be kind of dumb, right? Right. So I didn't do that, but I was very cognizant of what was happening. When we were in the back and we were doing what I call a diagnostic interview or a structural clinical interview, you ask a lot of different questions. So you go for that child's history. So you're going to ask, for example, school history from preschool to the kid's current, grade. You're going to ask parental history. Sometimes I'm asking, did you have any learning disabilities, or did you have an IEP to address your behaviors? You want a complete history about families. And so when you ask this history, you're going to also ask about any type of mental health history, medical history. You are getting a detailed background where some young therapists need improvement is with their interview skills. Why? Because that's an important tool that you can use in your report when you write it up, if you do psych testing, or it's an important tool to use as you get to know the family so that you can get all of the information needed in order to treat these kids. All right. During this structured clinical interview, I remember this little guy, and it's a boy. Some of you ask about gender, talking to himself. So again, this was me sitting back, writing notes, because I always have a notebook and a pen. And when you do an interview, back then, that's what I use. Now, we use computers and everything. And so I'm observing all of these things. So the interview is where we kind of decide which route we're going to take, whether it's therapy, testing, or both, or what kind of test will be used. Okay, because I always share which test I'm thinking about using for children with the parents, obviously, because you want their consent and you want the assent of the child. So I was always on board with making sure that they clearly understood what was going to happen to their child. So when they came in, for example, if I was going to assess their IQ, they already knew which exam I was going to use, with the flexibility to choose a different one if that one didn't seem to fit or give me the information that I need in order to work with this child. And that's what we did. So we decided, based upon the interview, that we were going to look at child A to determine if this kid had a learning disability or not. But here's the thing. If you're sitting there with the child and you see some behaviors that are, I'm not going to be Dr. Lisa, I'm just going to tell you odd, because I don't use the word odd when I work with families, but if they're off or they seem a little strange, which is a better word, you want to pay attention to that. And I did, which made me ask different questions. Different questions such as motor movement, hallucinations, whether it be auditory, visual, tactile, olfactory. Olfactory is important too, and a lot of clinicians may leave that out. Olfactory is important. Why? Because it can signal something else wrong organically in the brain. So you want to ask all those questions. When they seem a little bit bizarre, like maybe their, perception from reality could be off. And remember, I'm always a psychologist first. And so when I see something that seems a bit strange to me, I'm going to, go for that part to make sure I covered it, because you don't want to miss anything with regard to these children or your clients. And so we still decided at the end to go along with the possibility of a learning disability, and I will tell you why. You have child A, who clearly has some possible symptoms of something else, just from my vantage point, okay? Dad was totally against, later on I found out, what mom felt was going on with this child. It's hard to explain it to you because they didn't tell me that they knew that this child could see ghosts. They didn't. So what I'm trying to say to you is they knew what was really going on and what they wanted to find out, whether or not this kid was within reality or not. But I'm sitting there not knowing this part about this child. And then the dad actually just thought that his child was not within reality. And mom is like, oh yeah, this is cool. My kid can do this. My kid can talk to, my deceased grandmother, blah, 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 blah. So what happened was, because the dad did not believe this and they couldn't get a general, they couldn't get consistency within what they wanted, but I didn't know why. I just knew they came in for testing. I decided to take what I termed the easier route, which is looking for discrepancies in learning. So that's what we did. So what did that mean? That meant that I was going to give this child an intelligence test or an IQ test. And I was going to look at academics, so test reading, math, and writing. Working for that university, I didn't just do one test for reading, math, and writing. Typically, I would do one big test for all three and then break down reading, math, and writing, and especially reading for this little one. So I probably tested reading twice, and more than likely, I did another battery for writing, knowing me. I think, and most people would agree, that reading and writing go hand in hand. So I typically will do more to assess in those areas. Now, here's the thing though. When they left, and I remember that day because it must have been about 98 in St. Louis. And I'll tell you why I know. Because I was pregnant and it was hot. And that day is memorable to me because I walked outside into my car, and I'll never forget, my temperature gauge said 111. And I thought, why is that in St. Louis? Why are you so hot? And I remember sitting in my car with this big old belly, and I was going, oh my God. And they were outside as well. So I remember that. When they were chatting, like couples do, about their kids. But I was thinking, there's just something off. And wouldn't you think it was off too, just based upon what I told you already, that it felt like they knew something. For example, typically parents will, if you ask them about school and you want grades and teachers to fill out rating scales, and you have, concerns at home, a lot of our diagnoses need consistency, right? ADHD is one where you need consistency. So you need challenges at school and home. Otherwise, it may not be that, or a kid may be making a choice about where they behave. So you want consistency. And I wasn't getting that from them. I wasn't getting that. And so that was a red flag. They definitely were against me talking to the school. Now, if the parents are against you talking to the school, you can't do it. You can't break confidentiality. It's against the law, and it's an ethical violation, which meant that I could look at ADHD, but because you really need consistency and you need input from the school as to what could be going on, these parents were adamant about their kid not having ADHD anyway. But if you can't get that consistency, that may not be a route that you want to take. So I didn't with this kid. And when I think back, I still don't think that this child had ADHD, okay? And you'll understand that later on. So I was looking at a learning disability. If you don't know what a learning disability is, I'm going to take a little time to explain it to you. The childhood onset is what I'm looking at, what I was looking at for this child, and it's neurological. So, it can impact, a child's cognitive processes. So what does that mean? Well, when we talk about processes, how children are able to read books, how they're able to perform in mathematics, and their writing ability, okay? And how, the impact of having a learning disability can interfere with those academic skills. So if a child is having trouble reading, well, they're probably going to have trouble writing because you need to know how to read in order to write. When it interferes with basic academic skills, what you start to see is that children can have trouble with abstract reasoning. They can have trouble planning. They have trouble with memory and attention. So you see, when you think about planning, organization, memory, and attention, some people start thinking about ADHD. And that's how I think sometimes for some kids as well. So with the learning disability, all of this can also impact social relationships. So that's something that can occur as children get older as well. So in the workplace. So sometimes you work with people every now and then, and you'll start to wonder if this person has a learning disability, because sometimes the processing is or the ability to do, organize properly or do planning seems to be a lot harder for some people. Not impossible, because anybody can learn, but a little bit more challenging for some more than others. And so when all of this happens in school, and some of you already know this with school sites, because I have a license as a school site, we get called in, if these challenges are significant, and they are significantly impacting a child's ability to learn, even with interventions. There are a lot of professionals that I've encountered who do not believe in interventions. So that is not okay. You have to see what a child can do. And when they are delayed, a school should be intervening, and it may be for a long period of time before they refer kids for testing. So a lot of this I didn't have for child A. I didn't even know if this kid was getting interventions in school. Interventions is not something that necessarily has to be done in every state. Missouri is more of a discrepancy state, meaning the IQ is probably average, but about, 1.5 standard deviations below, or about 15 points, are the academic skills. So if the IQ is 90, 15 points below is what we're looking at to say that a kid has a learning disability. Illinois is different. Illinois is an intervention state. I'm on board with the interventions. If they're not being done, that's problematic, okay? Schools have to see if what they're doing works. And if they don't, then they should not be referring kids for testing, okay? Now, since I didn't have all of that, I'm going off of my very long interview, probably 2-hour interview. All of my data. So not only did I do an IQ test and an academic test, and then another academic test, I did all kinds of rating scales. This child was old enough to read and could do some of my rating scales. I even checked on the rating scales. I remember if some of the numbers were elevated, or what we call a significant, not difference, but in that significant range of possibly having, depression or anxiety, or other types of anxiety, such as test anxiety. So I'm looking for any elevations that would be significant clinically so that I can write them up in my report and really see what's going on with this little guy. And that took about, wow. I mentioned last week that I spend a lot of time with kids that I'm going to test because I really want to get to know them. And then after all of that is done, you score everything, which is easier now because everything's on the computer. Rarely do we use anything that's scored by hand. But the cool thing is that I can score them by hand because that's how we learned how to score all this stuff by hand. But anyway, it probably took about 6 weeks. And maybe another 2 to just kind of get it written up, organized, proofed, edited and all that. When all of that is over, I called this family back in because I wanted to figure out, what was going on. Because there were some discrepancies academically. And I wanted to be sure, which is what I do for a lot of kids, that these discrepancies, whether they were due to learning or not. Because sometimes kids will score lower on tests than they will actually in the classroom. And remember, I didn't have a lot of information about school at all, so I wasn't sure. So parents were on board for a learning disability, So what happened was in my report, I did indicate that this child had a learning disability. When they left, and typically after I test kids at the time when I was doing therapy, I was not always big on my testing kids coming to see me for therapy. I kind of like to refer them out for therapy. And that's just something that I like to do to just keep it separate. And then the therapy kids, I didn't test them. If that makes sense to you. If not, just let me know because I'm looking at, messages and questions as I speak. When they left, I didn't expect to see this kid anymore. Not at all. Now, we're going to talk about psychosis in a minute, but let me just say this to you. I didn't expect to see this kid because I was done testing. So when I'm done testing, even in the schools, right now, I typically don't get to see the kids anymore. And that used to be sad to me. And that's part of the reason I pursued a doctorate in psychology. I wanted to do more with the kids and understand them better. But in this case, I wound up resigning from this university. And that's a whole nother story, people, because the boss that I had treated me very badly. And I was pregnant. Let me give you a quick example. I was pregnant, I told you guys, and the mistreatment was pretty profound toward me. I think my former boss was just not a nice person and just didn't, like me too much, although he moved me to St. Louis. And you figure that one out. And my family. So, for example, there were gnats, lots of gnats in my office. And I said there were lots of gnats in my office. Now, you would think someone who knew that their employee was pregnant, that they wouldn't have people come in and spray with insecticide right before she walks into the room. And he did, and expected me to stay and sit down in the room, which, that was not going to happen. And so I didn't. Just little things like that, little bitty microaggressions toward me. And so I don't have to take that. So I quit. Okay. And I applied for this job, this other one in St. Louis. And I was very, very excited about this position, and they asked me to come on board. And I was 6 months pregnant at the time, and I didn't think that they would ask me to come into the job because I was already pregnant, and they did. So I'm getting settled into this new job, and we have a waiting list because this is a community mental health center. And I kid you not, a family called me. And I still can't tell you how they found me, but a family called and they said to call them back because I had tested a kid, and this kid didn't want to see anybody else but me. And I thought, because I'm not a native of St. Louis, so for me, I was thinking, who is this? So anyway, I called the family, and I was like, oh my God, this is Child A's family. Wow. So this is when it gets good. I decided to go ahead and work with this family. So this is, if you read the blogs, there are 4 buildings. There's a parking lot when you pull in, and there are 4 buildings, okay? Initially, I was in building 1, okay? So in building 1, I had this really nice office, and I walked out to the waiting room, and there was Child A, Child A's mother and father. And I'm like, wow, what are you doing here? What's wrong? Because I had tested them and, thought we were done at the university. So I took them back, and this baby was doing some of the same behaviors, just to kind of, looking around and whatnot. And I'm like, what is going on? Did I miss something? Because I try not to, but I'm human and I'm not perfect. So what did I miss, with this baby? By then, I'm even further in my pregnancy. I'm waddling around. And so this Child A was kind of shocked that I was a lot bigger, because I was, and ran up to me and hugged me in the office. And I'm like, I remember, I could still see it in my mind thinking, what the heck is going on? So they wanted to do therapy. I told you how I felt about doing therapy with my babies that I tested. But they found me. How could I say no? I was a behaviorist. They were having some behavioral challenges. They thought that, that this child was psychotic. And I'm like, psychotic? This is new. Where did psychosis come into play? This child sounded psychotic to the father. Strange fears. So this, again, remember, these are children. So this is a childhood onset, not adults. This one was described as having bizarre thoughts, strange fears, anything brain-based, okay? Just brain-based. Something isn't not quite right. That's typically what you hear from parents and other adults about children that they think may be psychotic. They'll go, baby, something is just not right. Something is just not right. There's just something going on with this baby's mind. Some of the things that this kid was telling the parents couldn't figure out if it was real or not. And you hear that as well. So, psychosis can be hard to tease out with young children. So guess what I had to do? A whole nother interview. Now, during this interview, there's a window to my left, okay? This little kid is looking out the window the whole time like this. Oh, you can't see me, some of you. I'm sorry. I'm like looking up and down at the window, just kind of showing those that can see me what it was like. So I'm talking to the parents. This kid is sitting at the window, just kind of looking up and down like something's out there, to the point where I'm going to the window like, the heck do you see? Because I have a ground window, and this kid's like, oh, I see one of my ghost friends out there. And I'm like, ghost friend? The heck is going on here, right? So my brain went to, okay, is this a delusion? This kid wasn't anxious. This kid wasn't depressed. This kid had no strange bodily movements, which sometimes you see, with the childhood onset of a psychosis. And I didn't pick up anything. I just started listening to what this child was telling me. And so, he was kind of telling me that there were ghosts outside of the window. And so I remember turning around looking at the parents kind of like, what is this? I mean, you didn't allude to any of this. And the mom's like, oh, he can see ghosts. And the dad's kind of like, yeah, right. This stuff's not real. That's why I'm saying, something is not quite right. And we should have told her when she tested him. And I'm kind of sitting there, just imagine this very pregnant psychologist whose brain is probably in a fog anyway from all of the pregnancy hormones. So I'm sitting there kind of like, crap, they didn't tell me any of this stuff, which, guys, that happens too. Parents will withhold information, but this is huge because now psychosis is a whole different ball game than, a learning disability. So I'm going through, my whole interview geared toward, this kid possibly having a psychosis, and or is this truly an ability that this kid can do? So I started over and started asking questions also to this child. The answers were definitely, I can see ghosts. I see demons. They're my friends. Actually, let me scratch that. This is not a kid who said demons. This kid is one who's talked about dark angels, but that these dark angels were friends. So let's think about that for a minute. So this was a child who was making friends with dark spirits. In my interview, this was a child who believed that these dark spirits were there to tuck him in the bed, to talk to him at night when he was scared, to play with. He played with them all the time. So I am sitting there, and I have my eyes closed now, picturing the whole thing, turning my chair around, looking at him, just kind of like, oh, another kid. Oh, wow. Oh, boy, he's playing with dark spirits. Okay, what do I do here? Because this is a kid who's totally befriending these dark entities. And I don't like that. And most of you know that by now. But what I had to do was to keep this child talking. So, after the interview, I decided to take this kid in therapy because I really wanted to work with him when I started to truly understand that this was a real ability for this child, and that I had to help him because he was definitely playing with what you and I know, being adults, were demons. I'll let you sit on that for a minute. Whew. So, here's one of the first sessions with this child. Okay, so we're in my office, and this window was huge to this kid. So I would sit on the left, and then there's a window, and then this baby would sit in front of me. And we had to sit in front of the window because what this kid liked to do was to tell me what these entities were doing outside of my window. This is probably one of the hardest things to do, and that is to sit back and listen to a kid talk to these dark entities. I never at that time had to do this, listen to this child talk to them. This was new for me. And that's exactly what this kid did. Just sit back and talk to him in front of me. And so things like, they're not going to come in your office. Well, I know they're not going to come in my office. Well, they don't want to come in here. Well, they can't come in here. That's what I'm thinking. I didn't say that out loud. So what he was doing was playing with them outside of the window. And so here's an example. I finally said, because remember, I was still kind of learning too. I finally said, all right, look. Because in the psychology mind of mine, I was trying to distinguish between whether this was a psychosis or this kid was delusional, or if this was truly something that this kid can do. Now, bear with me here. This child said to me, I need you to believe me because I can see the spirits outside. And I'm like, okay, all right. Well, you know what? Dr. Lisa Badass wants you to prove it. If they're outside and you're talking to them, there's a spider on the window. Tell them, I said, make the legs move. This spider was just sitting on the window. It wasn't moving. This kid said to me, they can hear you. And I'm like, well, I can't see him. I can't hear him, so I don't know. So it takes the kids to tell me things. And I said, okay, make the legs move. The legs moved. I'm like, no, that's just a coincidence. Spiders move. Spiders move. Right? We see them all the time. I saw one yesterday that almost got in my hair. It was moving up and down the web. Nope, this was different. It was sitting there and I said, if you're outside, make the legs move. And I'm like, yeah, I don't believe that. That didn't just happen. This kid is ecstatic, like, yeah. Did you see that? Did you see it? Did you see it? And I'm like, yeah, okay. All right. Well, tell this spirit that you see to make the spider move. Make it move. Make it go across the window. Right now. I kid you not, that spider moved. You can see me. The spider moved up the window. And I just sat there and I'll never forget it. And this child jumped up for joy and said, I've been telling my parents, I've been telling everybody all along, did you see that? Did you see that? Jumping up, grabbing me, jumping up and everything. And I'm like, yeah, I saw that. Yeah. I saw that. And he said, I tell people all the time, this stuff is real. I can see it. It just proved it to you. Dr. Lisa is right by the window messing with the spider. It's there. It's there. And I'm sitting back, kind of like, oh, crap. Whatever this kid sees outside just made the spider move twice. It went from the middle of the window all the way up to the right. Called the parents back in. I said, I believe you. I believe you. That was a turning point for me in my career. I said, I have to believe these kids. I can no longer look at them only as, possibly having mental health concerns. I can't do that. This kid hugged me and I hugged him back in front of his parents and I said, I believe you. And that's what started our rapport. I saw this kid for several weeks. And From then on, therapy consisted of trying so hard to get this kid to cope with the ability that he had. Let me give you another example. I have lots of them with this child because this was, again, a turning point in my head and in my career because I saw that. I saw his excitement too when he realized that somebody believed him, even if I couldn't see. So I don't even know if I wrote this part in the blog or not, but I'm just going to tell you another experience that I had with this baby, child A. But before I do that, the mother was so happy. Finally, somebody believes my kid. I said, I do. For some reason, I just asked the right question at the right time to witness it myself. I do believe him. And I did. And that started a very positive and meaningful relationship with this family and rapport. Now, that was a little bit different, which sometimes the fathers are. They're more reluctant. But I remember he was just glad that his child was able to talk to me. Yep. To get some of this out. So from then on, I guess I met the father's approval because he did not participate in the sessions any longer, which was fine. He had to work too. So one day, mom brings child A, is who we're talking about again, blog 6, to me for therapy. So after we went through therapy, because I really wanted to get this child back on track, you know, sometimes they get off track if they have this ability and they just kind of get into this ability and they let things go, such as their social relationships. You know, they start having, you know, poor grades, anxiety. Some of the kids are very, fearful of disability, you know, seeing these dark things, but not this kid. This kid, I only saw this kid get scared once, and I'll tell you right now when that happened. So I told you there were 4 buildings. Okay. Building, let's see, let me set you up for this one. So we were getting ready to move into building 2. It was being remodeled. So if you think about this kid sitting in the window again, one day we were sitting there after therapy and this kid said to me, Dr. Lisa, you guys can't move in that building. And I said, I don't have a choice. It's my job. Why shouldn't we move into that building? He said, there's too many demons in there. So he started calling them demons. Keep that in mind. And he said, they don't like you. They don't like you. You can't move in that building. And I said, I don't know what to do about that. I have to do what my boss and my company want. So again, this was building 2. So he was looking out the window and he was like, oh my God, there are 2 demons at the window. And I'm like, and I'm thinking about, what I did know about the Bible, they come really, in multiple, not to, throw a whole bunch of biblical things at you, but, you see 1, you see 2, and the whole legion, okay? Then he just said, oh my God, they're going up the steps. So the building had this really beautiful, these were old Victorians, so they had these really beautiful stained glass windows. And so this kid can see what was happening in the stained glass, and there was a staircase. So a staircase with the window, all brick building with the window, and beautiful stained glass window. And it's very beautiful. And so as the staircase went up, I want you to visualize, he's like, they're going upstairs. They're going to the second floor. Oh my God, there's a whole bunch of them. Dr. Lisa, you can't go in there. You can't go in there. They're going to hurt you. They're going to hurt you. And I'm like, just sitting there. I mean, I didn't know what to say to that. And so you got to promise not to go in there. I said, I won't go in there. Well, it's the truth, because I couldn't go in there anyway because of construction. So I had promised child A that I wouldn't go in building 2. And so I didn't. And I couldn't anyway, because of construction. So when you think about building 2, I took him to his mother. We went out in the waiting room, and our company moved us into building 2. And so this child kept warning me about building 2. But we were outside, because sometimes I did work with my clients outside. So now we're going to talk about building 3. So I told child A's mother, child A really wants to go to building 3, but I didn't know why. And I have to tell you, I didn't like building 3. It has nothing to do with the beauty of the building, had nothing to do with my coworkers. It was just dark as hell in there, and it was just creepy to me. Every time I would go in that building, just the air was so heavy. I just felt, you ever walked into a building, it was just like, there's something in here. I just don't know what it is because I can't see. Child A was determined to get into that building. So I asked child A's mother, because I'm not afraid of this stuff. So I'm like, all right, you really want to go in building 3? Fine, we will go in building 3. Mom's like, Dr. Lisa, if my kid says you have to go in building 3, then we have to go in building 3. This kid knows some stuff. And I'm like, oh, good Lord, what is this baby about to tell me about building 3? So we're in a parking lot. Building 3 has a couple of stairs and then a porch, if you know about, old brownstones, if you will. Excuse me, not Victorian. So we enter the back door, and the mother's behind me. Child A is in front of me. This kid is looking around the building, and I'm watching this kid like, what do you see? What the heck is going on? So we go into, if memory serves me correctly, this is the living room, because across the living room was the front door. So we kind of go to the right into the staircase. And I don't know if I talked about this in blog 6 or 7, but I know it's there somewhere. I'm all the way on like blog 19, so I don't remember. So we get to the staircase. This child is looking around up the staircase. We walk up the staircase, and I'm like, waddling my little self up the steps. And this kid stops and goes and turns around toward me and says, you have to leave. And I said, I'm not afraid to show you upstairs. Let's go. He pushes my top of my chest, very appropriate, because he's over me, because he's on a higher step. And he's like, no, you have to go. And I turn around and I look at his mother, and she's like, Dr. Lisa, if he says you have to get out of the building, you have to get out of the building. And I'm like, oh, you know what? I believe you, honey, but I'm not scared. We can go on up. And he's like, no. Now, the mother's behind me, because I may have been 7 or 8 months pregnant. I don't know. But apparently, if he was rushing me out, she may have thought that I would fall down the steps. So she's behind me, kind of like holding me in case I fall. And then he's like, no. And he looks at me in my eyes. He says, you have to go. And I said, okay. He said, out of the building. You can't come in here anymore. Go out of the building. So we get out the back door and down the steps, and I'm trying to figure out what just happened here. And this kid said, Dr. Lisa, you cannot go back in that building, especially pregnant. And I said, well, what's wrong in the building? And he said, there is a really angry demon in that building, and you cannot go in there anymore because it doesn't like you and it wants to hurt you. Now listen, as a side note, those of you who know me know how silly I can be. So I'm like, hurt me? How the heck is the spirit gonna hurt me? I'm me, right? I'm prayed up. I'm this, I'm that. I'm not scared. I was born and raised in East Cleveland. We know how to throw hands, blah, 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 blah. How am I going to fight a spirit, right? Just so silly. Too old for that kind of stuff. But, I'm just silly like that. And this kid gets real serious, like, no, you absolutely cannot go in that building. It will hurt you. He said, Dr. Lisa, when we were going up the steps, the reason that I wanted you to turn around is because there was gray smoke on the staircase. And I said, gray smoke? Because I knew the room was heavy. I told you it was heavy before I even met this. I knew this kid would find me, on my second job where we're talking about I was employed. And so, but this kid could actually see that there was gray smoke, up the staircase. And so I'm like, gray smoke, really? And then he said, yeah, and turned around and said, and that's where that demon is, and you can't go in there. You can't go in there. That's where the demon is. And I said, okay. What does gray smoke mean? He said, that it's haunted. It's got a demon in there. You just can't go. And as we were going up the steps, the demon was like standing at the steps. And I was afraid that it was going to hurt you, like push you down the steps. And so I'm like, okay, well, thank you. I won't go in the building. And I didn't. I didn't go back in that building for a while, for a couple of weeks. Because that was in my head. And of course, you don't want to be hurt overall, but just by something you don't know. There are more stories about Child A, but those are, some that I wanted to share. But here's the thing. I went back to building 3 a couple weeks later. And I had to go because the person that did human resources was in building 3. And so I had to turn in all of my work to go on to maternity leave. And when I was coming out of that back door, I don't recall how many steps, but I don't think there were any more than about 6. Do you know that I felt like something pushed me down those steps? But I didn't fall. So if I could give you a visual, it felt like something pushed me down the steps and then something caught me. So I didn't fall. But I remember standing there thinking, the heck just pushed me down the steps, right? And why didn't I fall? Because it's really easy to fall when your belly is like the size of a whale because your equilibrium is off. So I should have fallen down the steps, but I didn't. So I pick up the phone, right? And I call some folks in building 3. And I said, hey, because by then I've had at least 3 kids talk about building 3. So I finally said, hey, I just want to tell you a couple things that these kids are telling me. Have you heard this kind of stuff? Are you sitting back? Because I am. So they're like, yeah, we have a ghost in here. I'm like, They're like, yeah, his name is so-and-so. I don't remember his name. I said, oh yeah, when I walk in the building in the morning, I can hear him walking around and, we named him. You named a ghost? And they're like, oh yeah, he's been around for years. He's upstairs. He's harmless, blah, blah, blah. His name is so-and-so. When I come in the building, I'm like, oh, hi, John, or whatever the hell his name was. And I'm like, so when these kids sense that there's a presence in your building, which is building 3, you know about it. And they're like, oh yeah, he's been here for years. He's just part of our family. My job, they said the name, family. And I'm like, wow, okay, well, what these kids are telling me they see in building 3 is absolutely true because the staff confirmed it for me. So I love my boss. To this day, I love her. And I was telling her about this. So remember, I said I've been telling these stories for years. And I said, so the staff told me, yeah. And she's like, yeah. And I'm like, so you know about it too? And she said, yeah, that's the reason that I switched my office. And I said, why is that? She said, because there's a haunting in that building. There's a spirit in there and it's a demon. And I sensed it and could hear it. And I want it out of the building. So you all tell me that nebulous children exist or not, because I'm going to say they do. Now you have the staff confirming for me without them knowing anything about these kids other than, hey, these kids are telling me this. Should I be afraid of building 3? What do you have over there? And they're like, oh yeah, it's no big deal. We named it, blah, 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 blah. He walks around all the time. It's usually in the attic part of the building. I'm like, which upstairs is where child B and family told me that they saw him. I'm Dr. Lisa. If you want to know about child B, you know I have to leave you with a cliffhanger. You got to tune in next week, and I will talk to you about child B. If you have any questions, make sure you email me at kidscanseeghosts.com. You can find me all over social media. Thank you so much for listening, and I will talk to you all next week. Bye-bye.